Welcome to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast. Use the power of discovering new habits to create success in all areas of life. Body, fitness and nutrition, being, spirituality, passion and purpose, balance, marriage, kids and relationships, business, marketing, sales, leadership and systems. Transform your life by learning how habits work. And now your host, a husband, father, entrepreneur, trainer, coach, and warrior, Jesse Ewell.
Welcome back to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ewell, and today we're going to be talking about the habit of resilience. I have a very special guest on the show today. His name is Jim Stavis. He is a triple transplant survivor, author of When Hope Is Your Only Option. He is also the CEO of Paragon Steel, which is a steel distributor in Southern California. I just want to welcome you and having you on the show today.
Hi, Jesse. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. So I read up a little bit on your story. One of the things that really struck me was that 17 years old, you found out that you had diabetes. Was this kind of the start of this whole health process, or was there things that happened earlier on in your life?
No, that was really the beginning. I had a pretty normal life up until that time when I was diagnosed with juvenile type 1 diabetes. And that was back in the 1970s when it wasn't as common as it is today.
Right. And so, back in 1970s, when you found this out, what was that like for you being 17 years old and knowing what they have now? But back then, I'm guessing no one really knew that much about what to treat it with or how to do that. What was that like for you?
It was really pretty shocking and discouraging, to be perfectly honest with you, because to be given a diagnosis, which at that time I had a perfectly normal, healthy life, and then to be told that my life was going to contain things like kidney and heart disease, blindness, amputations, and a host of things. Plus, I'd have to take insulin shots, which for me at the time was a pretty major thing. And my life really looked very different at that time than, let's say, what my friends' lives looked like.
Sure. Yeah, I can't imagine at 17, hearing that not only in 2019, but this is, 1970, which was what, about 50 years ago?
50 years now, yes.
Yeah. So I can't imagine, what that was like back then. So as you found this out, what started to change in your life from that point forward?
But what I realized is that I really had a choice, and the choice was, how was I going to deal with this information, and how was it going to define my life, and in terms of how I would deal with it. I could have just kind of dropped out and become frustrated and used it to, in some ways, just kind of roll up into a ball and try and shrivel up to nothing. Or I could use it as a motivator to get my life together, realizing that my lifespan was going to be shorter than what I had thought it to be. And so that's what I did, as I kind of used it to get my life in order sooner, went to college, started a business at a very young age, raised a family, and my thought process was that hopefully medical technology would have an answer for me when those things started to happen, which is exactly what did occur.
Okay.
I never thought back in the early 1970s that organ transplantation would have been a reality for me many, many years later, which ultimately it saved my life.
Sure. So 1970, you kind of find this out, you start living your life, and obviously you probably having to take insulin and do all these testing. Where did you get to a point where you're like, this is really affecting my heart, my kidneys, my pancreas? Like, how long was kind of that span from 1970 to where you're like, okay, like, this is really starting to affect some areas on me?
Well, I was told when I was given that initial diagnosis that I'd be lucky to live to the age of 50. And
Okay.
so in my 40s, I started having heart problems, started in my early 40s. And then in my later 40s, my kidneys started to break down and I went into congestive heart failure, which is really very close to death.
Okay.
And I was on kidney dialysis for about a year. And then it was then that I went to Cedars-Sinai Hospital here in Southern California, and the head of cardiology there is a gentleman or doctor named P.K. Shaw. And Dr. Shaw told me that I was a candidate for a new heart and kidney transplant, and best case, pancreas too, because that was the source of the diabetes. The only
Sure.
problem is they had never done an organ transplant before, and he wasn't sure if it had ever been done anywhere else. So it was a pretty big moment for me, and it really goes back to that first discussion I was telling you back when I was 17, is that I realized that this was kind of a moment for me to decide what I was going to do, and I basically jumped at the opportunity and made that happen. So this is now 14 years ago. Just recently had the 14-year anniversary of that transplant, and I'm proud to say that everything's going really well because I'm just about to my 65th birthday coming up in about a week from now. So
So you had this 14 years ago in
yeah,
2005, and now it's almost 15 years later, and
doing
uh,
great.
you're in great health.
Yes, and
And
all the organs are working great, and a big part of my life and my mission now is helping for the cause of organ donation, encouraging people to donate, as well as using a lot of the lessons that I learned along the way to help them with their own adversity.
yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about the lessons. Obviously, this podcast is about the habit of resilience, and finding this out at 17. um, there's a couple things is like, man, back in 1970, I'm sure there wasn't a lot of people that knew what diabetes was or what it really meant. But just to hear that somebody's like, hey, you're not going to live past 50 or whatever, I would have to think in the back of your mind, it's like you have to kind of believe the doctor at the time, that that's true. And so your whole life, it's like your life's chasing you in a way. But just the fact that you were resilient enough. And can you talk a little bit about that? Not only that, but you had a family, you had a business, you had all these other things going on. And in the back of your mind, there's this thought of, I may not live past 50. So what was that like from a resilience standpoint?
Well, it's, the reality is we all have an expiration date. We just don't know when it is.
Right.
And the, for me to be told at a very young age when that expiration date would be, in some ways, gave me a timeline with which to work with. So I was being told that I'd be lucky to live past my 50th birthday. And as irony would be, I had those transplants as I was turning 50. So they certainly were telling me the truth, and the ideas that I was going to be subjected to all of these, let's say, failures that my body would start to experience as a result of the diabetes, that was true as well. So I was certainly, it's not as if I didn't know going in what I was in for,
Right.
but I had a belief system, and I think a big part of that is the hope that I had that there would be a solution for me, and that that solution ultimately, again, was transplant. But aside from that, I think you have to have kind of an inner resolve, an inner belief that you can endure just about anything. And
So,
so
so
that's
where did that inner belief come from in kind of that desire?
it's a great question. I think that to some degree we have a lot of through our upbringing and the experiences that we have through life teaches us a lot about how to get through hard times. But I also believe that you have faith, you have belief in family. There's a lot of things that motivate you, and along the way, when I was being prepared for transplant, they sent a social worker to me to discuss, whether or not I was up to the task of a transplant. And in their discussion with me, they said, "What is your source of hope?" And I thought, well, that's an interesting question. What is my source of hope? Because I think everybody needs to know what is it that drives you, that motivates you to get up and do what you do each and every day. And for me, it was actually two things. One is I had a level of optimism that things were going to work out. And so if things were meant to happen, then I would live. And if they weren't meant to happen, then I would die. And so in some ways, I had kind of a fatalistic view of life that, there are certain things we can control and there's certain things that we can't. So between the optimism and the fatalistic view, that those were the drivers to be my source of hope. But
Okay.
that was for me. And I realize that everybody's different, and some people, they might lean more on their faith, their belief in God. Others might have a belief in family, or for everybody that source of hope is different. And I think it's a great question to ask yourself is, what is it that drives you, and not to necessarily be on your deathbed when you're asking that question.
Yeah, I mean, how many kids do you have?
I have three
Yes,
kids.
you have 3 kids at 50 years old. How old are your kids?
Today I've got one that's 35, one that's 32, and one that's 29.
Okay, so back then they're anywhere from 15 to
Right,
20 years old, which,
right.
it's like your kids are it sounds like a lot of them, I mean, they were old enough to obviously know what was going on. Not only that, to know that, hey, here's my legacy with my kids. They're at an age where they're starting to enter into young adults. Uh,
Yes,
and so they understood and knew what was going on. But I think one of the powerful things you said is, my family, because I think a lot of times we have a tendency to be like, oh man, like all this stuff's happening to me. I think when you have family, you tend to focus on your family as your driver, versus, hey, there's something that may be wrong with me or going on with me. And like you said, you have this business also. So it's kind of like this entire focus of, hey, I have all these other things. Like I have a lot of responsibilities. I can't, go now.
ab- absolutely.
And I think, really resilience is, can you in hard times, or difficult situations, do you have the resilience to actually get through that? And I think leveraging, your family, your faith, your kids, and just, having a greater purpose beyond just kind of living is a super powerful way to kind of look at this and look at life.
I
So,
agree. I agree.
um,
Actually, a great story that when this was all going on, my son was in Colorado. He went to school at Boulder in Colorado, and I was there, and we were having one of these father-son moments. And he says to me, you and I, Dad, are very similar. And I said, oh, why do you say that? And he says, well, you know, um, we both have had to go through a lot of adversity in our life. And I thought, well, I know what my adversity is. What is yours? Being a 19-year-old college student. And he says, well, when you were going through all of your health adversity, it was really hard for me not knowing if my dad was going to survive and whether or not I was going to be going through life without a father. And it just kind of hit me on the head. Like, I'm so busy looking at it through my own eyes, not realizing how that's impacting, let's say, my family's eyes,
Right.
realizing that they could have lost me.
Right.
So that was a telling moment for me to realize that it's not all about me.
Yeah, and that's amazing that, your son was able to share that with you.
Yeah,
Uh, because I think a lot of times, kids, they tend to hold that stuff in, which I'm sure at 17, uh, it's like, who do I talk to about what's going on
right.
with me? And we tend to kind of internalize that stuff.
It's very true.
So how long are you married?
Yeah, I married my wife, and I have been together for 37 years now.
So what is what's this been like for you and your wife over like 37 years? Because she obviously like married into this and she's been with you, it sounds like, pretty much the whole way.
She has, and it's been I give her a lot of credit for helping me through the journey, because I think that having a strong support system is a critical part of what's necessary to get through it. I mean, interestingly, not to dwell on another subject, but my wife just was recently diagnosed with ovarian cancer, which
Oh,
we're
wow.
in the middle of right now. And so suddenly I am now the caregiver, and she's the center of attention, which, but because we've been through so much together, we kind of roll up our sleeves and just, kind of like, okay, we're going to get through this just like we got through the last adversity. And my kids are kind of falling in line like they did with me. They're now falling in line for her. So it's interesting what life can throw at us unexpectedly. And that's a big part of my message, is that the one thing that we know is that tomorrow is, not predicted, or, there's no shortage of change in everyone's life. So we
Yeah.
just there.
I think that's super powerful and super important that, like, you really leverage this to bring your family together instead of, it would be really easy for everybody to kind of run in their own way and just kind of think about themselves in this place.
Yeah.
So you wrote a book, I'm sure when did you write your book?
It came out last year. So
Okay.
so what part of my business is I write a newsletter, and in that newsletter I started to chronicle some of the stories of my story, and I found that I had, like, it resonated with a lot of people, and so I decided that I would take that and kind of expand on it and write a book. Which the idea is not just to write about my story, but it's to be able to kind of write a how to get through tough times, and using my story as the backdrop for that. And so um, it's been very well received for people going through any type of adversity, not just health, but personal, business. It could be just about anything, because the messaging is pretty universal.
Yeah, and I think from a health standpoint, is our health really can affect everything in our life, because it could affect our business, it could affect our family, which you can't always say with everything else. But I think that health is kind of your first place you always start. If there's something going on there, it's very hard to do a lot of your other things, or
Very
to
true.
show up in business and in life. So how can people find out about this book? Where can they find it?
So again, the name of the book is When Hope is Your Only Option. It's available through booksellers like Amazon and Barnes and Noble. There's an Audible version in my voice,
Okay.
which I recorded as well. And I have a Facebook page, Jim Stavis Speaks, which shows where I'm speaking at and posting blogs, etc. And then there's also a website, which is jimstavis.com, which you can go to. And I did a documentary on my story and also the story of the donor boy who died and whose organs I've got. He was a football player up in the Santa Barbara area, and I've gotten to know his family pretty well. And I chronicled his story as well because I'm the survivor, but he was unfortunately tragically lost in this whole story. So
Yeah, so let's talk about this for a second. You find out that you have to have a heart, kidney, and pancreas, right?
yeah,
Transplant. And to find a donor for one is probably pretty difficult, but to find a donor for all three is probably extremely rare. And I think the other thing that you said is this hospital had never done three at one time, correct?
that's correct.
And so you ended up having this 17-year-old boy who played football. He got into an auto accident.
That's correct.
And he was an organ donor, or his parents, said it was okay to be an organ donor. I think at 17, do you get to choose?
So the way it works is that, particularly when you go to the DMV for your license, they'll ask you a question, which is, would you be willing to be an organ donor? And for many, it's the first time they've ever been asked that question. So
Right.
in this particular instance, this boy's brother had a friend that had passed away and was an organ donor. And so my donors had said, God, that would be kind of cool. I mean, you can't take your organs with you. At least you could save other people's lives. So he made the conscious effort to say yes to organ donation. And then ultimately, when he passed, unfortunately, he had consented for his organs to be donated,
Okay.
and so I was the beneficiary of that. I had typically in this world, this organ donation world, donors and recipients don't meet one another. In my instance, I was given an opportunity to meet with them and have had a continuing relation with them, so that I was riding on the Rose Parade float a couple years ago, holding his picture, and the family was in the stands with my family, and it was kind of a cool thing. So we've had an ongoing relationship with this family. We get together a couple times a year. They listen to their son's heart beating in my chest when we get together. So it's a pretty special thing, really.
Yeah, that's amazing. So if you guys are listening to this, I'm probably not here interviewing Jim if, this 17-year-old boy doesn't donate his organs. So if you're listening to this, like, just think about the impact that this is, because like this guy's living proof that, people can save people's lives. And again, we can't take our organs with us when we die. So I would really challenge you to think about this, is how you could impact somebody else's life and actually save their life by you, doing this, and knowing that a 17-year-old boy actually like thought about that, and truly had an impact on your life, and just the amazing story you have with the family. So yeah, I think that's really amazing.
Well, thank you, Jesse. I appreciate the plug, because organ donation really does save lives. In fact, you save it's and if there's two register, one through the DMV and the other is just they have a registry on donatelifecalifornia.org that you can go on and actually register online. It's it really does. I'm living proof that organ donation saves lives.
Yeah. Let's get into a lesson somebody could take away from you and just kind of what you've been through, a life lesson.
Okay. I would say that a life lesson that's been probably most important to me is just to never give up hope. I mean, hope to me, I view it as it's something that has kind of been my mantra, if you will. I view hope as an action verb. It's not something that you just sit on the couch and think about what you're wishing for, but it's kind of a call to action. And what that action could be is researching whatever it is that's besetting you. It could be mentoring somebody through through something that they're going through. It could be praying, meditating, doing something that puts you on the right path, knowing that you're going to get from here to there.
Okay, so, to you, hope is putting yourself in action of actually like taking a step forward, even if it's a small step, in doing one thing like praying, meditation,
Correct.
studying about maybe what's going on in your life, mentoring.
Right.
So it sounds like these are all things that you did instead of staying stuck in
Right.
one place of, man, like there's just no way for me to cure this. And I think people overlook this as they want to know, like, hey, what's the secret to hope, or what's the secret to resilience? And what I'm hearing you say is it's just taking this one step forward every single day.
Yes, I actually broke it out into 3 stages. The first stage to me is you have to endure. You've got to get through whatever it is that's setting you back, be it pain, sorrow, loss, whatever that might be. You've got to somehow just get through it, or as Nike says, just do it.
Okay.
The second stage is hope, which is what I just was talking about, which is putting yourself in the right frame of mind, which can affect your belief system, your attitude, your behavior. And then the third stage, which is the stage that I would say I'm in now, which is the prevail stage, which is after you've gotten through the adversity and you've climbed the mountain. Now what? Now, how are you going to use that lessons that you've learned to help others get through their adversity? And that's, to me, perhaps the most fulfilling of the 3 stages, is because you're kind of giving back to the process.
Sure. And I think they talk a lot about this is when you can really leverage the lessons you've learned so other people may not have to go through the same pain or same loss that you have.
Right.
Uh, and it just, somebody said a long time ago in a program I was in, is pain shared is pain divided, happiness shared is happiness multiplied. And I think, you're giving people hope by sharing your pain. And so by you sharing your pain and what you've been through, you're also sharing your happiness at the same time, that you're actually giving people hope by just simply sharing your story.
Very true. I like that.
Yeah. So is there any last words you want to leave for someone?
Well, I essentially have 3 points, 2 of which we've covered, which is the hope message, which we just talked about, and the other was organ donation and how it saves lives. The third one, which to me is equally important, is for new diabetics, for people today that have diabetes, which is 5 times more common today than it was back when I got it in the early 70s, is that you could have a very normal life. I don't want to scare people into believing that, you're in line to have a triple organ transplant is your only way out of diabetes. That's not
Right.
the case. Today, you can live a totally normal life. There's products, technology that has helped diabetics today, and there's foods geared for diabetics. The world is a really different place. So I want to make sure that people aren't scared off by, oh my God, I've got diabetes. What does my life look like?
Sure. And 50 years ago, that was a true scare. We're talking
Right.
about years later, which I would say probably in the last, 10, 15 years, the majority of that has really, excelled, because as we know, everything in the internet space and information age is like things, they're being able to cure things, change things, and
Right.
at a higher rate. So,
They'll probably have a cure for a diabetic that of my age. If they were to get it today, there will probably be a cure within their life.
yeah,
So
which is amazing.
yeah,
So, but I think the biggest cure for everybody is to have resilience in anything you're
yes,
doing, and I think that might be a greater cure uh, for everything in life versus just kind of staying stuck in the pain, because I think a lot of people stay stuck in this pain, and they don't get out, and they don't have hope, and they don't prevail. um, and so I think this is a powerful thing that people can really lean on.
cheers to that.
So, well, hey, I want to thank you for being on here and sharing your story and just sharing this time with you. I think it's amazing what you've been able to do and endure, and just what you're doing with what you've been through is super powerful. I'm going to leave any way to contact you in the show notes. And again, if you're not an organ donor, all it literally takes is somebody going on a website and doing that, or going to the DMV and having it changed on your license. Again, like, Jim isn't here if somebody didn't choose that. And so just realize there's 124,000 people in the state of California alone, or in the
No, no,
US.
that's across the U.S., but California is the highest percentage is here in California, over 10% in California alone.
Wow.
So
So
it's a
just
big number.
think about how much you could impact somebody's life, and realize that the person you're actually listening to on this podcast has been a recipient of 3 organs and probably would not be alive today without those. So,
Absolutely,
yeah, well,
absolutely.
thank you for being on today.
Thank you, Jesse.
If you guys are looking to connect further with a group of like-minded people, join myself and so many others in the Habit-Based Lifestyle Secrets group, where I will be dropping daily habits to help you live to your full potential. If you want to be one of our next case studies and begin living this habit-based lifestyle, feel free to reach out to me, Jesse at habitbasedlifestyle.com. Until next episode, have a great day. All right, that's it,
All
man. Well,
right.
hey, thank you so much for being on here. And it was great to get to know you, and I'll make sure I get you a copy of this.
Okay. Sorry for the technical
Hey,
difficulties
it's
I
all
was
good,
having.
man. We got a handle, so don't worry about it.
All right. Very good. Thank you. You
Have
take
a good
care.
day. Okay,
All
bye-bye.
right. Bye bye.